Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be focusing upon a very unique and very interesting United Nations program called the Global Compact and what it's going to be doing to work with cities to help provide many, many resources and to help create a better world. My guest today is an expert in this area. My guest is Patricia Holly Purcell. Ms. Purcell is the head of the partnerships in the United Nations Global Compact Cities program. Patricia, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thanks so much, Bill. It's great to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. You got an exciting program that's coming up, but let's talk a little bit, just an overview of Global Compact. Yeah. When was it formed? Why was it formed? What's its main goal?
Sure. So UN Global Compact was actually founded in 1999 and launched, I think, officially in 2000 by former late Secretary General Kofi Annan. And how it came up, apparently, was through a speech that Secretary General had given at that time, where he really wanted to encourage a compact between business and others around the world to really give a human face, to some of the key development challenges that the world was facing and, of course, continues to face. And apparently that speech went over very well and got a huge response from the corporate world that in the days following the speech, there were all these phone calls coming through the Secretary General's office saying, how do we join the compact? And that was really the the origins of the UN Global Compact and how it's became to have such momentum almost nearly 20 years later, where it now has over 9,000 participating companies around the world of all sizes. And the compact really focuses on four main pillars, which are in areas of anti-corruption, human rights, labor, and the environment. And there are 10 principles under those four pillars of the Global Compact. And of course, since 2015, companies are also, when they're members of the Global Compact and they adhere to these 10 principles, they're also adhering to the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's very much a link between these core pillars and the SDGs since their adoption. So what companies do, what it means to be a member of the Global Compact, is that they have to report on their progress and show meaningful action around these pillars and the SDGs. The Secretary General has to receive a letter from Chief Executive of the companies, expressing their interest and their willingness to commit and show progress in these areas. And then every year, we receive the reports from companies and monitor their progress. So now we're also excited to be working more closely with local governments and with cities to try to build a stronger connection between the members of the Global Compact and local governments to really try to even emphasize more the importance of localizing the SDGs.
Exactly, and it's very important that the private sector get involved because they play a critical role, obviously, in helping to deal with climate change, to deal with all the problems we're dealing with. They have a very, very intricate relationship in helping to overcome these problems. But I'm glad you mentioned about the four functional areas and the fact you have like 9,000, I think you mentioned something like that, companies. And when they come on board, they have to meet certain standards or they're dropped. And I know you dropped hundreds over the years, and it's not like you get a good housekeeping seal of approval, you're on forever, but you have to perform and you have to really meet the rigid requirements.
Absolutely. We delist companies every day for not doing what they say they're going to do. And of course, we are a United Nations program, so it's very important that there's a clear distinction, between this being something that is just a signature and actually being about action. And as I mentioned, the companies, when they first express interest, part of that process and ongoing process is to actually make a commitment at the highest level of the company to the Secretary General. And all of the reporting, of course, is also shared at that level. So it is important that the rigor and the integrity of the program is maintained. But I think companies, this is actually welcome by companies because there's very clearly a movement beyond, and has been for some time, beyond corporate social responsibility just being about something that's separated from business, core business, to sustainability being actually mainstreamed throughout throughout a business's goals. So this is something we also tried to promote in that way.
Exactly, and this is a voluntary program.
Exactly.
Nobody is coerced into joining if they want to, but if they would like, they can go to globalcompact.org and take a look at it, and also some of the many other exciting things that you have underway. Well, you mentioned Sustainable Development Goals. Good segue right into that. In 2015, the 193 countries at the UN General Assembly adopted the Sustainable Development Goals that will run from 2016 to 2030, and to eliminate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to preserve the planet Earth, to develop partnerships with the private sector and other groups to do this. Which of these goals are, they're all important. All 17 goals are important, but which ones are you focusing on to bring into your city's program?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Bill, because the obvious one would be SDG 11, which is about making cities safe, resilient, sustainable, and there are many targets under SDG 11, like the first one being affordable housing, which many cities across the world can relate to. And of course, the SDGs are a universal agenda. It's not just about one area of the world, but it's about everywhere in the world. But that said, I think what we're seeing is that many cities have different challenges that go beyond just the targets under SDG 11, and their concerns range from things like health and air pollution to skills training for a new generation of youth that are coming through in the next generation and won't have jobs. There are no jobs in many of these communities in the fastest urbanizing areas of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia. So these are big concerns that sort of transcend just any one goal. And what we're trying to do with the cities program is bring together committed Global Compact members, corporate members, with committed local governments and cities to really look at the integrated impact that we can have across all of the SDGs and the 10 principles.
Now, how are you doing that? How are you reaching out to these private sector folks and bringing them in the same room with the governments and all of the key players, the stakeholders? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, it goes back to sort of understanding that with this idea, this concept of corporate social responsibility or sustainable business is really part of core business. So now, with cities, a lot of companies that we're working with so far and will continue to grow those partnerships see value in the actual concrete action that they can take within a city. It's sort of like a people and place-based approach to the Sustainable Development Goals. And companies see a connection to their core business. So whether they're in construction or area of water and sanitation or electric mobility, whatever their sector, they can see a very clear opportunity to be working in cities and to make investments where they otherwise would have perhaps made them too, because they represent new markets or new opportunities to work with new sets of customers. But they see a wider development impact that they can make on the ground that can happen more naturally when you put these companies together with these local governments and mayors.
Now, there are hundreds of thousands of cities around the world. You're not networking with all 100,000, I'm sure, but do you have model projects, pilot projects? Do you have certain cities that you want to focus on? If so, which ones are they and why?
So how we're selecting the cities and also the partners, we put out a call for expressions of interest at the beginning of 2018. And so the real implementation will start next year, or I should say, throughout 2019 and 2020. And the cities that we'll be looking at, well, first they have to have a regional balance, and also
I'm sorry, a regional balance?
A regional balance. So
what is that?
That means having a good number in Asia Pacific, a good number in Middle East, North Africa, a good number in Africa.
Around the world.
Exactly, to have a good regional balance, and then working with companies at a global level who have an interest in these areas, but also critically through UN Global Compact's local networks, which are comprised of businesses that are in that region or in that city already, where we can really connect. Some of the cities that we'll be looking to work with in the coming months include, I'll give you one example, is in Curitiba and the state of Paraná in Brazil. And it's really interested in leveraging its increasing a reputation as a smart city for the region and leveraging that to have greater development impacts. So we're looking at a specific project in the city in one of the oldest historical areas of the city, which is a regeneration project, which will impact about 200,000 people in that community, but also the student population of about 100,000, where we can really connect sort of young entrepreneurs, young business people early on with the community and with business who will be partnering with us there to sort of pursue some of the challenges, the solutions for the challenges that city is facing, or that community is facing.
A beautiful city too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Curitiba certainly is.
Yeah.
To do this now, are you just focus on Curitiba for a moment? Is it you'll be setting up incubators there to help start small businesses or help small businesses cut their overhead and to work together or whatever to improve the bottom line? There'll be programs to train youth, maybe for jobs of the future, which are shrinking because of artificial intelligence, which we'll get into in just a moment. But what types of services specifically will you be providing?
So the approach for the cities program, and it goes across the board with any city that we're working in, of course, recognizing that different cities are at different stages of development and that different, business partners have different interests at different stages of the city's development. But broadly, it's a process of problem identification, really narrowing, in on what the priorities of the city are in terms of its SDG goals, and then the co-creation of solutions to address those problems. So they could be a number of things that you've just mentioned, but it's really a bottom-up approach. So it's really the city and the partners in the driver's seat looking at what the priorities are and what sort of solutions they can come up with, and then of course mobilizing the support, the finance, and the investment to make those solutions a reality.
Now at the end of next year, how many cities would you like to have in this project as you launch it, with the idea, I'm assuming the year after you'll add more and more and share the information, show the best practices and things such as that, but do you have a target?
Well, we do have a target. We have a 2020 vision, which is really by 2020. We'll be operational in 20 cities with at least 20 corresponding projects or solutions that will be in the process of being implemented, have been implemented, or at least have the finance and support for implementation.
Now, you mentioned regional balance, which is very important. You go to Africa, South America, Central America, Asia, wherever it may be, but do you have in this mix, are you looking at certain size cities? Curitiba is not nearly as big as Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, but do you have a certain population that you're focusing on? Do you want a megalopolis, or do you want a couple of megalopolises, smaller cities and micro cities, or something like that?
I think it is important to have a balance, not only in geography but also in demographic balance, and also for our program to be able to help reach and particularly bring to the conversation access to corporate members that some of these smaller cities might not otherwise have access to. Benin and Cantonal is another good example, and anyway, an African example where we'd be working a much smaller population, certainly than a Curitiba, but also wants to do something really innovative, which is engage the municipality that wants to do something really innovative in terms of engaging the youth, current and future, where it sees have an interest in technology and AI and all these other sort of cool emerging solutions to some big challenges, and they don't want to lose that talent. They want to incubate that talent. So the municipality, with its very modest means, has set up sort of an incubator for this, for like a mini Silicon Valley, if you will. And so our program would like to also recognize those types of efforts and try to find a way to support those efforts. So it really depends on what the city needs and how we can best match that with the Global Compact membership that we have.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections Television are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS station, a community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a website and you like our shows and would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives locally. Today we're talking about a very interesting United Nations agency, the UN program, the Global Compact, and what is being done to work with cities, because apparently that's where the majority of the people are living, perhaps now, and certainly will be by 2050. My guest is an expert on this program. My guest is Patricia Holly Purcell, and she's the head of the partnerships in the UN Global Compact Cities program. Patricia, I just kind of blurted out that I'm not sure if more people live in urban areas now, but I think by 2050, 75% of the population is supposed to be in the cities.
Yeah.
What kind of a challenge is that going to pose?
Yeah.
And by 2050, we're at 7.5 billion now.
Yeah.
We're going to be at 9 to 10 billion.
Yeah.
What types of challenges will they confront?
Well, I think urbanization in general poses, a number of different challenges, for every city around the world. But you're absolutely correct that today most people, more than half the world's population, live in cities, and certainly by mid-century, that will be around the 70% upwards mark, as you mentioned. The greatest challenges certainly exist for those countries and the cities that are experiencing the most rapid urbanization. And so you look at places like sub-Saharan Africa. Before I came to the Global Compact, I was based in Nairobi at UN Habitat's global headquarters. And, I was there for several years, and it really gave me an opportunity, not only in Nairobi and working in Kenya, but really in the region, to see urbanization in action. And so when I think about the challenges of rapid and mostly unplanned urbanization in these areas, I liken it to climate change. If we wait 20 years to try to address some of these challenges, and they are everything from, growing poverty to inequality to the risks of climate, and how climate, for example, is impacting on rural areas and how that's then impacting on urban, and the list goes on, health, pollution. If we wait 20 years till those cities are already built, it will be too late. So we really do need urgent action now, and we need investment to make that happen. And we hear a lot about that, from the United Nations, talking about the importance of bringing private sector to the table, but in a very concrete and meaningful way. That's really what we're trying to do with the Cities program, is to give corporations that have an interest in these development challenges. They're already signatories to the Global Compact. They're already committed to the 10 principles and to the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we give them a practical platform, for investment and support, in local communities and cities?
You mentioned the urban areas, and we've talked about how they're going to expand quite dramatically. I saw some figures. You know this figures much better than I do, but it's something like 85% of the climate change carbon footprint is coming out of cities because there are so many cars, there are trucks, you've got plants that are belching out fumes, that type of thing. How are we going to help those cities to plan to be more eco-friendly, shall we say, and move away from fossil fuels and to leave a smaller carbon footprint?
I think this is where, concepts like smart cities are starting to get, a lot more traction in terms of the social and economic and environmental impacts that they can have, beyond the sort of cool, components of technology, but how can that technology really, impact on development and some of these major global challenges? You're quite right that cities, responsible for 2/3 of global emissions for the reasons you mentioned. There are great opportunities, though, in places that are rapidly urbanizing, that haven't, yet locked in carbon into their energy mix, into their operations, and they can leapfrog. No power to solar power, and we're seeing a lot of efforts like that happening. Where those cities already have, these challenges where they're confronted with, existing infrastructure and energy mix and so on. Then I think also there's an opportunity for technology to come into play, and this concept of smart cities, to help address some of these bigger challenges. And that seems to be a very promising trend where we're seeing smart cities events all around the world. I just came from Smart Cities in Barcelona, where there's a real concerted effort to match some of the city's challenges with business. So I'm quite positive about it, but it is a big challenge.
It is certainly going to be a big challenge, right? But we have to move forward on it. We have no choice on it. And the city, again, as you mentioned, is going to play such a critical role. There are other aspects that are happening in the cities. We see that as people move into the cities, they're not going to be using cars as much. They're going to be using mass transit. People are going to be living in high rises, things like that. How is that going to affect the economy? One way or the other?
I think there are, when you think about, big trends of the future, and like the conversion, for example, to all electric mobility, both public and private, you could imagine having quite a significant impact on the use of public space and land, which is one of the biggest challenges now, to accommodate new urban residents, but also to make that urban space equitable and affordable. So if you have, these new trends coming in, we have to think a bit beyond, the immediate, perhaps more obvious benefits of electric mobility in terms of climate and pollution, but also what that means in terms of a structure of a city. And if you have more land available, if you have more access, if you have more public space, you could actually imagine a resurgence of, the community, small businesses. I mean, I just, in my neighborhood in New York City, which is a beautiful neighborhood downtown, but I'm seeing already so many businesses that are closing, and it's because the rents are too high, and people are moving out because the rents are too high. And so you're really having a negative impact on community. So I actually see some of these solutions to big threats like climate change having other benefits to local economic growth, diversification, and the engagement of community in their community.
You were with UN Habitat, and of course UN Habitat, you can tell me more about it, tell us about it, but it focused on urban areas, human settlements.
That's right.
And did you look at bring in artificial intelligence into your discussions with UN Habitat or with your program today? Because we've seen staggering figures like, within 15 years, 50% of all the jobs we have today will not be around. They'll be done by robots, they'll be merged, they will just be obsolete, whatever the case might be. But how is artificial intelligence playing into this whole planning scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of my colleagues at UN Habitat worked in artificial intelligence. I personally did not. I think it's a very interesting area, though, when you look at what business is doing. And so another rationale for connecting business with city governments, with mayors, is so that they can understand what business is thinking about, these sort of disruptive areas of change, and what can, local governments learn from business. And so AI is a great example, actually, of a target group of companies, those working in that space that we would like to, bring to the table, because we think that whilst, of course, there's some, forecasts on the potential negative impact, I'm sure there's also a lot of positive impacts that this technology and the whole thinking about it could have for cities in terms of their planning. A lot of cities, for example, lack, the data to even know how to plan for the urban expansion that they're facing in the next generation. And even though, some great, global companies out there have been trying to, put all of that data together, it still remains a huge challenge. And so if we can get, the companies to the table that actually use, evolution in AI to help understand, where the land cover is, what is the opportunity for development, that in of itself would be a huge breakthrough for many cities facing rapid urbanization.
It certainly would, no doubt about that. Well, before we run out of time, are there any other aspects of your program you want to bring to our audience today, something we haven't had a chance to talk about? Yeah,
well, you mentioned UN Habitat a few times, so I think it's just important to because I've been emphasizing, of course, the importance of bringing the private sector members of Global Compact together with cities, but we're also working with many other partners, including through the UN Habitat, UNDP, UNCDF, and also civil society groups, academia. It's a multi-stakeholder approach, and I think that's what's really important to also emphasize here, that it can't just be done by any particular sector or segment. That when we're talking about urbanization and planning for the future where most people will live, it's going to take everyone at the table.
It certainly is, right. Well, as you look down the road, in the last 35 seconds we have, the hardest question, what do you see as your major challenge? We've talked about climate change, which everybody, well, not everybody, a large number of people believe that's our number one challenge. But what is your major challenge as you move forward?
I think that political cycles are a major challenge when it comes to local level government, for sure. So the solutions, that you put in place now, they have to transcend, what a mayor's tenure is. And so this is why it's really important to as again, have these other stakeholders at the table, because, we need to have a legacy view here and intention. So that's one challenge I think that, we definitely are focused on, but it's one of many. Yeah.
It certainly is, and you have to have that continuity
Yeah.
when it comes to long-range planning. You just can't have great ideas for 4 years and that office holder goes out, or the next person comes in and says, well, I don't like any of this. But there has to be continuity in that, and that's going to be obviously a major, major challenge. Well, this is a fascinating program that you've undertaken, and it's one that's so vital and so necessary, because cities, they are playing a key role now, and they're going to play even more of a major role in the future. And we've got to make sure that we build cities of the future that are sustainable, that are able to handle large numbers of people. We look at our cities around the world today, and most of them are really getting behind as far as the decaying, if you will, of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Most cities are suffering major problems because, for various reasons, whatever the reasons may be. But this is a fascinating program, and we'll have to have you back in a few months or so after you've had a chance to really launch it. But Patricia Purcell, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.